we don't have a lot of time. I just want to jump right in and ask about Chinese hacking. So CISA's director, Jenny Easterly, warned about Chinese hackers targeting critical infrastructure earlier this year. Brandon, I'll start with you. What's the worst case scenario here?
Well, I think unfortunately the sky is the limit when it comes to both Chinese intentions and their capabilities. We have already detected that they have compromised U.S. critical infrastructure. And while 15 years ago their targeting of the United States was largely focused on political and economic espionage, that's much different today. Today we have found them burrowing into our critical infrastructure, into places where the only purpose for their compromise is to pre-position for future attack, to disrupt or destroy our critical infrastructure at a critical moment, largely probably to affect geopolitical decision-making with the United States. And their doctrine is actually very clear on what they want to do. They want to affect U.S. ability to project power into the Pacific to support our friends and allies there, to potentially ensure that they're victorious in a conflict over Taiwan. But not so much just preventing the movement, but they actually want to cause societal panic inside the United States. And so that means disrupting power, disrupting water, disrupting critical transportation nodes. And we have seen their cyber compromises following exactly that doctrine. And so it is incumbent upon everyone to make sure that our systems are as protected as possible to ensure that that doesn't happen.
The Biden administration's obviously been engaging with China more, has various channels of communication set up, trying to manage tensions. Do you see any change in China's behavior in the wake of those conversations?
So I'll start, and then I'm sure Sandra has more to say here, but we have not seen a change in China's targeting of our critical infrastructure over the past 18 months since we've started to be more vocal about what we have discovered.
Mm-hmm. Sandra, would you like to jump in?
We've also seen, if there's any change at all, it's been that over the years China's become more sophisticated in their techniques to obscure what they're doing, and as they are embedded in our critical infrastructure. I'll give a very specific example. They are starting to do something called living off the land techniques, and what that is they mimic the native functionality of operating systems, so it is becoming very hard to detect them. And from the perspective of intelligence research, I can tell you that we're having to do more. It's a harder job now to detect some of the activity that they're doing. They're also obfuscating by taking advantage of home servers, right? So they're using all of these techniques to really become almost invisible until such time that they decide to act. And I'll just reiterate what Brandon said, which is that when you have persistence in networks, it gives you strategic optionality to do something in the future. So whatever engagement we're going to have in the future, we're dealing with it today, because today is when the placement and access is being established.
Jeetu, I want to go to you. I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenge for the U.S. government and the private sector in trying to prevent this activity?
One of the big challenges that at least we're seeing is the targeting of outdated infrastructure that the adversaries are using to go out and exploit vulnerabilities that might exist. And the interesting part is the amount of time that it takes for conducting an exploit now, from the time that a vulnerability has been announced, discovered and announced, is actually going down to single-digit days. And I wouldn't be surprised if it goes down to hours and minutes over the course of the next few, in the future. And so we have to figure out a way that these critical infrastructure elements are built from the ground up to be designed to be continuously updated and not have this kind of massive lag time for updating and the vulnerabilities getting patched. Right now, it takes about 45 days, 20 to 45 days for a vulnerability to get patched. But the last few attacks that have happened, the exploit happened in 4 days from the time that a vulnerability was announced. So you've got this big patching gap that needs to get solved for.
Brandon, I wanted to ask you about this new first-of-its-kind rule that CISA's put out on cyber incident reporting for U.S. companies. What are you trying to prevent here, and are you, what are you trying to prevent? What's the goal here?
Sure. So I think this is designed to help give us visibility in terms of what is happening today on U.S. networks. We do not believe that we have sufficient visibility into the cyber attacks that are happening every single day against U.S. companies, U.S. government agencies, state and local governments. That's because a relatively small number of entities report into the government, either us or our colleagues at the FBI, and we need to change that. If we have that level of visibility, if we understand what is happening, the techniques that are used, it allows us to be able to act more quickly. I think our ultimate goal is that no cyber attack should happen more than once, because after it happens once, if it's reported in quickly, we're able to utilize that information, get it out to others, improve network defense more generally. So while there is reporting today, it is very isolated. Some sectors have reporting, state and local governments have certain breach reporting requirements, but there's no consistent reporting across U.S. critical infrastructure that says, if you are hit by a cyber attack, get that into the government so that they can anonymize and then use that information to support network defenders across the country. So we think it'll help us spot adversary campaigns earlier, allow us to render assistance, and ultimately turbocharge the work that we do every day, which is empowering network defenders to protect our critical networks.
And Sandra, what do you see as the biggest challenge when it comes to bolstering the cooperation between the federal government and the private sector, and preventing cyber attacks, particularly as it pertains to critical infrastructure?
Well, I think that, first of all, the only people that benefit when we don't talk to each other about the threats is the threat actor themselves. So we don't share that information. That gives them the edge, and it gives them the ability to do it over and over and over again to a wide group of businesses. I think the challenge is when you are a business and you are, business critical functions come to a halt because of a cyber incident, you're having the worst day in your career, and then what are going to be the requirements of reporting? Are they going to hinder the progress? Are they going to, I think that's what businesses can be concerned about, is are these regulations and reporting rules going to hinder them in what they need to do? But I think that that's something where I'm pretty confident we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we can protect business operations and do good reporting. Because if we don't share that intelligence and we don't share that threat information, we're going to be in a tough spot. And the threat actor is just going to keep doing what they're doing to us.
Obviously, we're in an election year. A lot of focus on potential election influence, foreign interference. Brandon, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what CISA is doing right now to address disinformation and potential election interference this year.
The threats to our elections continue to increase, and I think the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has put out information talking about the array of foreign actors that are interested in targeting U.S. elections. Russia obviously provided a playbook back in 2016. Other countries are refining it, trying to improve upon it so that they can achieve their goals, which are potentially to sow discord in the United States, undermine our confidence in our democratic institutions, and unfortunately, they have fertile ground in the United States today. So what we are doing, and kind of our role within the broader U.S. government's work in this space, is focused on our state and local election officials, making sure that they have the resources that they need to be successful, both protecting their systems from cyber and physical attacks, but also amplifying their voice when it comes to election information, because they are the ones who have the most accurate information on how elections are conducted, particularly in the United States, where elections are completely decentralized, and the source of the information is really going to be from that local election official within your jurisdiction. We're also trying to make sure that we have the ability to provide accurate information at scale. We started doing that in the 2020 election through our election security rumor versus reality website, that we want to be a kind of a go-to source for accurate information on how election processes work in the United States, and then a resource to get you out further to those local officials where you can kind of get the clarifying information on how things may be done where you live and where you vote. But I think most importantly, is the American people should have confidence in the overall system. And we are trying to reinforce that point over and over again because over the past 7 years, the work that we have done in support of election officials, the work that election officials have done, have made our elections far more secure than they were in 2016. And it's why we have confidence and why we think the American people should have confidence as well.
Is Russia the biggest threat here, or are you more worried about other actors?
I think many actors are trying to engage in the space, and they will utilize different tools. And in 2020, we obviously saw Iran launching attempted to be a sophisticated operation to mimic Proud Boys, send out text messages, to release disinformation videos. And the community came together, both the government and the election community, to provide information, accurate information on why that was not the case. And so I think we are likely to see nearly all of our adversaries attempt to affect our election, and we can't let that happen.
Sandra, I want to go to you with that question too. Is there a particular country you think poses the biggest threat this cycle?
Well, Mandiant just published a list of all of the threat actors that we have seen do something in the realm of election security, not just against the United States, but all over the world. And what's interesting to me is these threat actors are still active right now. So that group that Brandon was just talking about was recently active in Israel. And so we're looking at entities and groups and governments who have a plan. They have a mission. They have been doing this type of thing for years, and we should be expecting that they're going to try to do something. I never would have guessed that they would have, Iran would have tried to mimic Proud Boy emails or send out a video with Metallica in the background to try to, who would have thought, right? But so it's hard to say exactly what creative approach they're going to take, but I like the idea that we're paying attention, and that's going to help us.
Jeetu, I want to ask you about this as well. Do you think there's enough communication between the federal government and the private sector when it comes to addressing threats to elections?
I think we are definitely getting way, way better than what we used to be 5 or 10 years ago. In fact, Brandon, we're working very closely with CISA in a lot of different areas. And I do think one of the key elements is making sure that we can continuously and proactively share information and intelligence between the public and private sector. And if you think about Talos, which is our threat intelligence, organization or unit within Cisco, we work with 60 different organizations, both public and private sector, to continuously keep sharing information back and forth, because the reality is the tech community and the providers need to work very closely together, even if there might be a competitive element, because the true enemy isn't your competitor, it's actually the adversary. And we have to make sure that we're aligning and sharing intelligence with each other.
Brandon, is CISA communicating with social media companies? I know there had been sort of a cutoff of communication due to some ongoing legal issues, but I mean, what's the level of communication there?
So CISA is not the one that's primarily communicating with social media companies, but there are other parts of the U.S. government that are engaging with them in terms of alerting them when there is foreign activity on their platform. So that work is continuing. As I said, I think we're focused less on the social media aspect of this and much more focused on how we can work with election officials and get their message out to the American people, and making sure that they have the resources, the tools, and the support they need to be successful.
Okay. My final question, I would love all of you to answer this if we can do it very short. What keeps you up at night?
I'll start, but I think it's where we began today, which is the targeting of our critical infrastructure, the prepositioning on it for future disruptive attacks. That is something where it's not the issue that is front and center every single day, because it's not the thing like ransomware that's causing the steady stream of disruptions, but it's the one that I think could have the gravest impact on our country, and it's the one where we most need to be prepared for the future.
Sandra?
We respond to 1,300 incidents a year, and the large majority of those organizations recover and can keep pressing forward, and they get better at their defenses. So I sleep fine, but I would sleep better if we were paying more attention to the growing capabilities of our adversaries and their focus on undermining our institutions. I think that paying closer attention would make us all sleep better.
Jeetu?
I'd say the adversaries are continuing to get more and more sophisticated. And if you think about the gap that exists right now between an exploit happening and when a patch happens, that's a huge challenge, like I talked about earlier. But I'd say the biggest challenge that anyone who's a security practitioner or happens to be in this industry has is we've moved squarely in the territory of there's massive consequences to human lives when security attacks happen. I mean, you have critical infrastructure like a hospital get attacked, and now people won't be able to get dialysis. If you have the power grid attacked, you lose power. You have the financial services, the financial system attacked, you can't move money around. So I think there's a societal level of damage that's pretty grave that requires us to be very proactive and communicative. And this is a data game. You can't handle these attacks at human scale. You must do it at machine scale. And in order to do it at machine scale, you have to make sure that the intelligence is brought together and then correlated, and the data is correlated so that 3 low-level alerts that you might have ignored otherwise can be correlated to actually be graduated to a high-level alert that you can then do something about.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all so much for the wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.